So what comes to mind is that I would say, you know what, I think a lot about, like threats. I don't know why, maybe it's a lifetime story, but I think the biggest threat that is facing the Western society is apathy. If you can see somebody who is weaker than you, an old lady, dropping a bag at the crosswalk, or, somebody struggling, in our case, it could be a veteran without a leg. And if you can just turn away and look away, that apathy is the biggest threat because um, we lose the humanity, and we've been so conditioned. Like the more we get away from hi, nice to meet you, personal meetings to being behind the screen, it becomes easier and easier and easier to look away.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. As you heard in the intro, our guest today is Ukrainian born American Lyubim Kogan. Lyubim, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Melvin. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm really interested in hearing your story. Lots of twists and turns. So, you've been a five-time first-generation immigrant. Where do you live now?
Right now, I am in Turkey. That's where I run Wings for Heroes mission. So home for now is Turkey.
All right, tell me about the five-time immigration story.
Okay. So we go back to 1992. It's the year after former Soviet Union fell apart and Ukraine became an independent country. I was 17 and we left. It was the whole family. My dad packed up. I was the oldest out of three. Packed up our family and we moved to the United States. It was basically done. It wasn't even an overnight. He came home one day and he said, "We're going." I said, "When?" He said, "In about 4 hours." I said, "Where?" He said, "We're going to the United States." I said, "For how long?" He said, "Forever." So, so that was my
Wow.
first immigration, and I came to the East Coast. We were welcomed by my brothers, by my father's brother or my uncle, and I wanted to, I was skiing. I was 17 years old and I really wanted to ski. It was a big dream to go to the Olympics. And I grew up during the Cold War. So the backdrop of my childhood, when I was 5, the Afghanistan war started and it went on until I was 16. And growing up in the 70s and 80s, basically, I pictured America that President Reagan was sitting in his office and he had this big red button and he could go boom, push it at any time and we would be all finished. But excuse me, I also knew that Lake Placid, New York had two Olympic Games, excuse me, one in 1932 and one in 1980. And since I had few hours to pack, so I packed my helmet, I packed my ski boots, and I packed my suit. I was wearing my tracksuit, and I remember that on the plane I didn't even have socks. And we made it to New Jersey, and I asked my uncle. I said, "Look, I want to go. I want to ski." And he wrote a letter to all different ski schools, and I got accepted to the National Sports Academy in Lake Placid. That was my real first home in the United States, and basically it was a boarding school. They gave me a scholarship. I could learn English. I could live there. They fed me, and they also let me ski as much as I wanted to. They also gave me my first skis. So my first experience of being an immigrant for the first time, it was coming to the United States in the early 90s, and it was the most awesome experience that I could have imagined because, without knowing anything, especially the language, I found Americans being very generous, very welcoming, and very open. I was super lucky that I had a roommate who wanted to become an English teacher. So we spent hours without a dictionary learning words, and he was my first teacher. And since you asked me about five immigrations, then I spent 24 years in the United States. And being first generation immigrant, you don't really have much to fall back on. So you have to work super hard. Everybody works really hard, but I think generation immigrants have just that first, you know, I think 10 years or maybe a little more, you have to learn the language, you have to understand the culture, and you have to assimilate. And since I went into a boarding school and everyone was an American around me, we had one Japanese guy and I was the second non-American student, but basically, I was fortunate to blend in the culture, and I did not live, where communities. If you look at around the United States, we have a lot of communities where immigrants come and they stay in one place together, and you can live 20, 30 years in one place that are surrounded by immigrants and not really know English. And for me, it wasn't the story. And I worked super hard, and then I'd say when I got to the top, when all my dreams came true in terms of financial, in terms of professional and financial, and I got to co-author a book with Steve Forbes. It came out in 2014. It became a bestseller. And the next year, I was invited to speak at the United Nations headquarters in New York City with Brian Tracy, who was my not only a mentor, I really admired how he presented himself, how he came across on stage, and how he taught people. I was one of his students for more than 10 years. And then we shared the stage, and it so happened that I I went briefly, briefly. I went, and first I moved to Slovakia, and then I got an offer to do an audit for a nationwide company in Ukraine. And I finished it in 2015, and they offered me to stay because what I found out was clear that they needed to replace management, but they needed to find somebody who could do the job. And I saw, that people were super scared. They were looking for somebody to lead. And since I came from the States, there were really high hopes. And one thing that we have in the United States, we have a clear way of doing business that everybody who is invited to be a part of the project, you assume that they know minimum, they have a basic education and they understand how things work. But it wasn't the case when I started working in Ukraine after not being there for 24 years. I'm a foreigner. I was just born in the place, and I'm a guy from another country. And actually, I said yes before I really understood what I was getting myself into. And if you think back that the war in Ukraine started in 2014 with annexation of Crimea, and in 2022 it went full scale. But at first, I couldn't see it, but because our company was nationwide, and once I started traveling east and southeast, then it became very real. So, going to the United States, then I lived for about 9 months in Slovakia. Going back to Ukraine, that's number three. Then after I finished the project, I wanted to learn how to fly paragliders, so I took a year off, and I lived in Austria, and I think I would have stayed there for a little longer, but COVID kind of pushed everybody out of the countries that they were visiting or living in and back to their homeland. And actually, for 6 months, I spent in Ukraine another 6 months, and then I started the mission here in Turkey. So right now we're in Turkey. From Soviet Union to the United States, from the US to Slovakia, from Slovakia to Ukraine, from Ukraine to Austria, and then from Austria to Turkey. Those are my 5 countries, and living with 5 different nations, completely different, understanding that we're so different, that we can be looking at one thing and seeing totally different things. That's the biggest
Wow.
thing that I could take away from, so many places.
All right, I want to go a little bit deeper on your first immigration story when you came
Okay.
from Soviet Ukraine to the United States with just a few hours of advance notice. Tell me about the details and what you remember, like about the plane ride over, all those kind of
Okay.
details.
So if you go back to the early 90s in Ukraine or all the republics that were part of the former Soviet Union, you had this superpower, that super controlled country that when it fell apart, each independent the republic, each republic became independent. And one of the things that it was in extreme poverty all around. Let's talk specifically in Ukraine. It's just basically the big country fell apart. Like I was an athlete, right? And as a national team athlete, we got notices that all our training camps were canceled for the next year. So
Mm.
basically, the budget that you had from one big country, it just disappeared overnight. And I know that the most people who were affected, like older people, for them, it was super hard to switch. You have currencies changing and the prices are the inflation. We had like, 100% a day. You come every
Wow.
other day and things were like doubling in price. And I remember looking at my grandmother, she could not really handle it psychologically because when you're in your 70s and you have a fixed pension, you cannot really imagine how you're going to live through. But what happened was that the crime became really rampant. Like having kidnappings became a normal thing. It was just
Wow.
such a widespread occurrence, and especially if you think about people who are leaving their country and they're moving somewhere to another country, what happens is that you sell everything. You basically have the most important thing that you can carry with you, and you have all the cash that you can raise. So if somebody from outside your family finds out that you're immigrating, that family becomes a target for kidnapping, ransom, or just coming in and taking everything they can get out of your house or your apartment. So the way my dad did this, he sent. I have two younger sisters. At that time, they were, let's see, I was 17, one was 12, and one was 7. And my father sent them with their mom to, I think they went to Bulgaria. So they went outside of Ukraine for vacation that lasted the whole summer. We were leaving in October and they left early summer and they didn't come back. So when he came home in Ukraine, physically, it was just him and I. And my sisters and my stepmom, they were outside of the country. So we packed up overnight. We packed up the same evening, loaded up our car, and we drove. We actually had to drive to Moscow because all the international
Mm.
planes left from Moscow. And we halfway was Belarusia, Minsk. That's where my dad got out, and he said, "I have meetings, and you got to keep going towards Moscow." And he got out, and I drove across, Belarusia to Russia, and I picked him up in the airport in Moscow. The next day, we got on the plane and we flew to Czech Republic, and that's where there was a family reunion. My sisters came, and my stepmom came, and my dad and I we flew in from Moscow, and they came from wherever they were. We spent a day or two in Prague, and then with Delta Airlines, we went from Prague to Newark Liberty Airport. So my first airport is the Liberty
Liberty.
Airport in Newark. I actually had a little bit, we were so stressful moving, and my stepmom, she had some kind of seizure on the plane,
Mm.
and after the plane landed, we actually, everybody, all the passengers got off the plane, and I was on the plane with my two younger sisters, and my dad went with the ambulance, and my stepmom, they went to the hospital directly, and he left me all the documents, everything that we had for the immigration, and um, Immigration Naturalization Services officers, they came on board, and we had actually, I remember it was so cool because Delta Airlines, they had those Mickey Mouse hats that they put on my sisters. Yeah, they were entertaining them. They were super cool. And, the guys with guns came in, they stamped their passports. And then I took my two little sisters and the stuff that we had, and I walked out. And at that time, 92, you don't have cell phones, okay? You don't have a way of communicating. And my father's brother was waiting on the other side, and he was like, "Where were you guys? Like everybody's out. They collected all the luggage, and you're nowhere to be found." So I told him that we had this, issue with the seizure on the plane, and my dad went to the hospital. So he took the three of us, drove him to his home, and that was my first experience getting into the United States. Um, I told you that I got a scholarship to a ski school, so my experience was completely like the first year was totally different than your average immigrant because I was like in a really, it was a bubble environment. They really took care of me. And after finishing, I spent 1 year in the National Sports Academy, and then I went on to study. Like my goal was to learn English because I wanted to go to a really good school, but I still wanted to ski. So I stayed in upstate New York, and I got into a community college, and I took every English course they offered, like all of them on the list. And from there, I got accepted to New York University. And it's actually that's the really, how they say, be careful what you wish for. So I want to ski, right? I'm training for the Olympics. I tell everybody I had two dreams. One was mine and one was my father's. So my father's dream is that I go to a really good business school. My dream, of course, I want to ski forever. I don't want to go to school. Um, and once I got into NYU, actually it's the school that I wanted to go. It's the one school that I wanted to go to. And I realized that if I wanted to ski, my commute is going to be 600 miles a week. So I
Wow.
structured all my classes that I would finish on Thursday, and then I would walk. I had off-campus housing across the Penn Station. So for people who are not familiar with New York City, New York University is on West 4th Street. And if you keep walking up north, the numbers are going up. On the 32nd was off-campus housing because NYU ran out of space and they put us up into Southgate Towers. It was a four-star hotel, and we spent there 1 year, me and my roommate, in a really nice suite. So I would walk almost 30 blocks. I would change, and I would grab my stuff, and I would go another, 10, 15 blocks to 42nd Street for the central bus station, or it's already in Manhattan. And I would take the bus to Albany, New York. It's 150 miles. And there I would pick up my
Wow.
car and I would drive the other 350 miles to Lake Placid. And I would get in there late on Thursday night, like, midnight, maybe a little bit later. Then I would ski Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And if it wasn't a competition season on Sunday night, I would drive back to Albany, leave my car, and take the bus into Manhattan. But if it was a competition season, we skied Northwest. So it was New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine sometimes. So the commute got a lot longer, and I could not leave right after the competition. So I normally came to New York like with a very early bus, like 4 o'clock in the morning. I would be on the bus going to Manhattan just to catch my first class. And I did that 600-mile commute for 2 years. And
Wow.
yeah, then that
Was
was
it was
that
it
was
worth it? Was it worth it
of
to get to
course.
the Olympics?
Yes, of course. But I think, it's like I'm thinking, it's like it's one of the things that stays with you forever. If you make the Olympic team, you become an Olympian and you are an Olympian for the rest of your life. My goal was never, I knew that I would not get a medal because if we go back, not just Ukraine, you take the whole Soviet Union, which produced a lot of, gold, silver, and bronze medals at the Olympic Games. We had only one guy who won a gold medal, and it was like in 1950s. So I ski jumped, and for my sport, we were not competitive sports. We were not dominant sports. We were just that sport that is always like, you know, really. We train hard and we do well at home, but when we go to the international competitions, it was a very different league. If it's like somebody came to play football to the United States, nobody can play football against American football players. And it was the same kind of situation. We were that country that we tried, but we were not that good. So again, for me, making the team was the goal. It was not to win a medal. Actually, it was trying not to repeat the performance of somebody from Ukraine who before me took the last place. So that was the one, like the biggest thing once you make the team. But to answer your question, yes, absolutely. I think it's the first time I felt like I'm a part of something bigger than me. Like when I got there and I looked around what was going on, then you get the picture because normally it's a lot of grinding and working away from. There's no spotlight when you're training for the Olympics. It's like spotlight is just a few weeks when you're there, but decades before you get there, it's your own way. But yeah, absolutely. it's definitely
Wow.
worth it. So if you have any kids listening who are trying to go for the Olympics, it's a good goal to have. And hey, just in case you miss it, it's something you'll always remember, you know. There are only few spots on the team, and trying to be one of those guys is or girls, it's a life-worthy goal for me, I
Well,
think. Yes, absolutely.
it's interesting. Last night, my wife and I watched the movie. I hadn't ever seen this movie. I can't believe I hadn't seen it. Called Cool Runnings, about the Jamaican bobsled team, and that's such an inspirational movie about how
Right?
these four guys who were runners. Um, you can go watch the movie yourself for the details, but they want to be in the Olympics so bad they're willing to try any sport, and they end up trying out to be a bobsled team from a place, an island, a tropical
From
island
Jamaica.
like Jamaica, and they end up making
Never
it to the
snows.
Olympics. Yes,
Yeah.
it's a great
But
movie,
you know,
great
I
movie.
think, well, I think it's a good thing that you brought it up because you think about the Olympics, what they were last century and what they're now. Those are two different beasts. When I went to the 1998 Olympics in Japan, Nagano, Japan. So at that time, the rules about sponsorships were so strict that we even had to cover the name, the brand makers of helmets. You could not show it because they had really strict rules about brands that you could not display it. It was not commercialized. If you won the Olympics in 1998, yeah, you're a national hero and you're an international star, but you're not financially set. And we're talking about the best guys in the world. And now it became so commercial that they don't even show the guys who are like, if you are in the Olympics, but you're somewhere towards the end, you may get zero TV coverage. Like you can go and they will not show you. Yeah, they'll find a story of somebody who's coming like Cool Runnings. They will do that. But I think right now it became so commercialized that they're showing like, those top five, top 10, top three to the audience, and the audience is not getting the spirit of it. Like the spirit has been removed from the TV coverage. And if you ever have a chance to go watch it live, that is a really cool goal to have too, just to experience of what it's like in there. Yeah.
Okay, so you talked about having two dreams: your dream and your dad's dream. You fulfilled your dream of making it to the Olympics, and then you fulfilled your dad's dream of becoming successful in the business world. So
Yes.
you built a career by specializing in financial planning and risk management. And as you mentioned, you once wrote a best-selling book with businessman and former presidential candidate Steve Forbes. Then you
Yes.
disappeared for a decade. I'm really interested. Where did you go and what did you do during that 10
Okay.
years?
So basically, before writing the book, before getting all the big offers, like my claim to fame of my big breakthrough came in 2006, 2007. I was one of the people who, like, I had one of my degrees is in accounting, and I had forensic accounting class where a former partner of Ernst and Young was a professor, and he showed us, annual report, and he said, look, it was General Mills' annual report, and he says, look, this is General Mills, it's a big company, and they have a pretty picture on the front, but this is the last time I hope you guys are going to look at this report from the front because all the things that are interesting, you'll find them in the back. And we went into a place that is called footnotes. And in footnotes, the companies disclose something that may happen, happened, or very likely to happen, but it is not required by the rules to be shown on the financial statements. So it's sitting in the back of their annual report saying that I may show up or I will very likely show up with some period of time, income statement, balance sheet, whatever. And I was looking at Citibank's annual report, and I just found in footnotes they had more than $50 billion of losses, and it was all related to subprime mortgages. And I
Mm.
remember sitting there and thinking, whoa, if one of them is in it that deep, they're all in the same thing. And once they start bailing, and I'm talking about big financial institutions and banks, because they pile up into a place that has the most opportunity. And when they're exiting, it's whoever can exit first exits, and everybody else, left holding the bag. And I went to all my clients and I said, this is going to happen. And when it hits the market, it will be too late to do anything. So, at the end of the big bull run, like if you look at the market, it goes up, and then it just goes, woo. So, you'll be missing that. And it may be really painful for a period of time, but then, it gets to the end of the cliff in that case and it falls over. So after I moved all my clients, I really, I tell people I had nothing else to do, which wasn't exactly the truth, but you cannot tell the same people they already agreed with you, no, we're waiting. So I started a radio show in Denver on KHOW, and it was at first it was super slow, but then I figured out that I hired the guy he just cleaned up the sound, he made it work really nice, and it took off, Melvin. I think, let's say within a year, I had 11 different stations in 7 different
Wow.
states. Yeah, so what I was doing, I
Nice.
was basically talking on the radio, say, look, we all know that they're issuing this no income, no asset, what they call them Nina loans, where you didn't need to verify your income, you didn't need to show assets, and they just were giving out mortgages. And at that time, some people couldn't make, at the end, like some people would make first, second, then they couldn't make a third payment. But then at the end, people couldn't even make the first payment.
Wow.
So there was this huge machine issuing new credit, and the consumer who was getting that credit, there's no way they could pay for it. So and then they were packaging, repackaging, and doing creative things that the rating agencies would not really change their ratings, and that's how the game went on until it stopped. So, when it stopped, we were ready. And that's how my clients lost. Like I didn't have any clients accounts that were net negative. It was either zero or they had some gains. And that's where, after that, the opportunity came to first speak in New York City. Steve Forbes had success in the new economy symposium. It was my first big speaking engagement. I remember being super stressed. I don't remember anything except like the the stage, like everything went dark. I could see a few people in the front, and I could see the lights, and I could see the clock because you have the clock, and I saw the clock ticking, and I was so nervous that when I left, like you perspire on your upper body, but it looked like somebody dumped a bucket of water on me, like my
Wow.
trousers were completely wet, and I went from that stage. I didn't remember anything, and then I got a letter saying like, you did really well. And then after that, the opportunity to contribute to the book that Steve Forbes was putting together, it came my way. The book came out, and a year later, I ended up. By the way, it was a bestseller, but all the money, the way my contribution was structured is that they wanted to donate all the money to charities, and I agreed to that. So I don't even know how much they sold. I don't even know where it went, but I know that it was more than 200 charities that received help from that publication, from that specific book. And instead of cashing out, just running my practice and growing in the United States, I felt like I'm standing on the street. There are no cars around me, all the green lights, and I'm the only guy who has the car, and I can go anywhere I want as fast as I want to. But then I find myself in a place that, the Ukraine 2015, that I thought I could make a difference. And I really saw that I was making a difference just by my presence. I said, there will be no politics. If you guys want to argue, there is the door, go. When you're done, come back. But we're done. We really need to concentrate and save this company. We need to work together. Otherwise, we have no chance. And in reality, if you look at the numbers, we had no chance because when the war started, the US, they borrowed money in US dollars to finance growth, and they grew really well. It was a really established company. When a company borrowed money in US dollars, and when the war started, the currency collapsed. It went from like, for $1 they had to pay 9 Ukrainian, and it was just a matter of few months, it went up to like over 30. So the currency lost, say, lost 80% of its value in just a matter of a few weeks. So a company was not able to carry that debt, and the volume was dropping significantly. In any case, I saw that the situation changed as fast as it did in the US during the financial crisis, and people didn't know what to do. So I decided to stay, and I basically, from going, being like a public person writing books and speaking on stages, I just went inside of an office in the Western Ukraine at first, and I had to, I had to build teams. I had to teach people how to do things, what it means to, get your job done and get it done right on time, and what you do if you get stuck. And basically, it's a lot of things that we take for granted because, we grew up in the Western culture where we were taught that there are things that are called deadlines and standards, and there are principles of running the business, and there's loyalty and there's trust, and all those things. They didn't really exist, and they still don't exist in Ukraine because it is still more than 10 years later at war. But it was working with people one on one, working with teams, and there was no publicity. There was nothing. I was really alone because when you are a foreigner running a company not in your country, you just don't really, and you're the boss, you don't get to socialize with people who work for you. You just tell them what to do, and then you go home and you carry all your issues home, and then you come back to work the next day and you start over. So um, those 10 years is just, I did everything. I cleaned the floors. I showed people what it means to have a place that has a Western standard. And I don't think there's anything that I haven't done in terms of working with the company, just working on the floor with cleaning people and then working with the management in the boardroom. Um, that's what I was doing, for years.
All right, so you were working behind the scenes, and you were also starting a charity called Wings for Heroes, which is a big part of the point of this conversation today. Tell me about Wings for Heroes, how it began, and what the purpose is.
At the beginning, um, we are going to uh, go back to 2016. I was at one of our gas stations. It was a gas station by the highway, and I saw a double amputee veteran roll from our gas station, and he went towards the highway. And basically, there's no pedestrian way. You can walk there. And I remember noticing it and thinking, where's this guy going? Like, how he's going to get around? Because there's a highway and there is no place for a wheelchair. But in any case, I carried on with my work. And about 20 minutes later, we had a huge storm that rolled in. It was one of those cold summer storms with lightning and thunder and wind. And I remember that this guy left, and the next exit it takes you probably 15 minutes, 20 minutes to drive there. I don't even know how many days it would take to get there by wheelchair. So we took one of our pickup trucks and followed in the direction where he went, and I found this guy. He was on the side of the road. He was splashed in mud and covered completely, just soaked. And we put his chair in the back of the pickup truck and put him inside. And I don't know if you ever seen people that even if change their clothes and you clean them up, there's not much left. Like there was no life left in that guy. You could tell that
Hmm.
he's barely hanging on. And I think back about him quite often, and I really think that that night, that day, me finding him and driving him home, we got him some food, some cigarettes, and I think it could have been the last act of kindness that he's seen in his lifetime because, he was in really bad shape. And then we fast forward from 2016 to like 2022. So 6 years forward, that's when the full scale invasion started. And I saw a teenage girl walk out in the middle of a football field. It was a packed stadium. She had a prosthetic leg, and she said that, look, they can come and they can take a part of my land, and they can even take a part of my body, but they cannot break me. And that was the moment that I knew that I'm done, just thinking about I should do something, I want to do something, to actually doing it. And the Wings for Heroes, it's the idea. I told you that I lived a year in Austria, and I learned how to fly paragliders. And one thing I remember is when I did my first flight, I was so scared. I said goodbye to my dad. I said goodbye to my brother. It's like, you have this little plastic bag with strings, and you are hanging in the backpack thousands of feet above the ground. And I'm like, I don't even know that guy behind me. It's just like, why did I do this crazy thing? But I remember that moment, like all the issues that I had, and just to give you an idea, um, I'm running a nationwide infrastructure company. I have more than 2,000 employees. We have Christmas coming up, and we have no money to pay salaries. So one of the things that I did first, I stopped paying myself any salary. So from the beginning, for years, the company couldn't afford to pay me, and I knew that if I would leave, then it would be the end of that. So what I was saying, when you're working for a company that is in big financial trouble, and you are the CEO of the company, you basically I looked at the numbers, and I knew if I take my salary, then the consequences will be dire, because we needed to buy a product, we needed to buy diesel. And when you were counting every gallon and seeing which gas stations should get that gallon, who will sell it faster, that we can just keep kind of adding oil to the almost dry engine, so it doesn't completely blow up. I didn't pay myself, but then I had to figure out how to pay people, because I am in the country that is at war, and that country was the second poorest in Europe before the war started. So we have Christmas coming up, and 2,000 families, you cannot miss that paycheck, because that's the most significant paycheck. That's when they buy presents, and they live paycheck to paycheck, because it's extremely poor. And I remember sitting our Christmas, 20 December 24th, and Ukrainian Christmas was on January 6th. So we had to pay 2,000 salaries, and there was another accountant and I, there were two of us. We just stayed in between the two Christmases, and we would sell a little bit of diesel, and all the profits half goes to buying new one and half goes in paying salaries. And that year we did pay over 2,000 salaries. And you clearly, I don't know, maybe it really is meaningful for me to be productive and important in other people's lives and making a contribution. It's like, going to every show, I would like to know what I can do the best to share with the audience. But basically, it was an experience that I could not get in any business school in America, and the experience I could not get working in any company in America. And I remember thinking for myself that if we make it past Wednesday, we're going to survive. And I don't remember what year, and I don't remember what month, but I remember there was one Wednesday. And everything that I've learned and everything that I've seen and studied, and all my experience, all, business school and working on Wall Street, and switching to running a registered investment advisory, and meeting people who are a lot smarter, a lot more important and powerful than me. Like, I picked a little bit of knowledge from everybody, and I'm looking at the numbers, and I'm like, it's just not going to happen. And I remember I told myself, said, if we pass that Wednesday, then it's running on some miracle course, and my job is not to interfere and not to get in. And yeah, we passed that Wednesday. I'd like to tell you that it was easier, but it was not. But I learned for myself that if we all, and this was the only way we survived, is that I started creating teams, and I wanted everybody to come together to the point where I said, we have to leave the office. We have to go. We found the restaurant, and then we found a bigger restaurant, and when we found the bigger restaurant, until we got our own house. Like, we rented the place that I would invite people twice a week. Anybody could come from any department, and they had to come with an ideas on how we can, basically sell more. How can we sell more so the company will grow and grow out of this problem that was created by the not outside environment was the big influence, but then everybody kind of fell into this depression. And we had people show up from different departments, and they came up with such great ideas that I could never think about those ideas on my own. And because they work in the place of work, they see the customer, they know what they need, they had brilliant ideas. So one of the things that I am 100% certain is that you can get your next big break idea from anybody. It could be a janitor, it could be a cleaning lady, it could be somebody who's standing opening the doors, because the person who's opening the doors, he sees everybody who's going in and out, how they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they're talking, what they're complaining about, and that person who opens the doors, they actually naturally try to solve the issues. And if you never give them a chance to speak, you will never know. But we had those brainstorm sessions, and we would come out of everyone and go and take action right away. We would pick four ideas that you could start doing now that don't require any investment, that can be done by hand, and just implement it right there and then. So, we went through a huge crisis, and everybody hustled. Everybody wanted to participate, and people who wanted to help, they came on the team. People who complained, they left the company. And that was basically 7 years like that. Probably first five were a nightmare, like to the point where I remember I was paralyzed on one half. I couldn't move.
Wow.
Took so much out of me. I would go home and I would just collapse, and I would lay there and I couldn't move my right side of my body.
Wow.
So physically, emotionally, it was super demanding
So, what's the
and
biggest lesson
intense.
you learned from working with wounded warriors?
Well, first of all, they don't need our pity. They don't need anyone's pity. It's not about feeling sorry, feeling bad about them. They're the most resilient people that are walking or crawling or rolling on this planet. You know, um, if you've seen, there is a movie, I think it's Seabiscuit,
Mm-hmm.
about the racing horses.
Yes.
And when horse breaks a leg, and if they get to compete, they are not as fast. And basically in that movie, the horse was giving a taste, just what it feels like to get ahead, and then the horse becomes a winning horse. And that's exactly the same thing when you talk to, wounded veterans, that either they're amputees or they're deaf. First of all, they do have needs. They have real needs, and they really need help. But that help does not live with the government. It does not live with any departments. Nobody can answer those needs but just the regular people. And what they need is to feel included. And the biggest thing is that you can take away arms and legs, and then the real strength comes out. Some reason, the ones who make the choice, we know you can go two ways. Oh, it's so bad, my life is over, I'm going to drink myself and do drugs and I'm finished. It's a way out, unfortunately. But there's also the other side, the completely opposite. And that side that says, no, I am not. One of our next guests, he's a double amputee, and they just lost a baby. Like, he came from war
Wow.
without legs, and it was a 3 months old, or just tiny baby. And that guy took like a week or 10 days off, and he says, okay, I'm back on. And he's in the gym. His thing is that, he's an example to everyone that we don't have excuses. His thing is like physical strength. That's what he has, an amazing inner strength, but he is an example to our society. Like, we have legs, I have two legs, I have two arms, but I have so many problems, and I cannot get off my chair and like start moving forward because I have some doubts, I have some limiting beliefs, I had bad experience of failing before, and I don't want to do it again. But they just say yes to everything. and they say, I just want to live a little more. Like that's the common thing about amputees. Like when they're super happy, like they will take a picture. I will make a small video of where they are right now, and the comment is always the same. I just want to live a little more.
Hmm.
So one thing, there is not one thing that I've learned. There are many things. Number one, our physical body is super important to us. To me as an athlete, it's super important. But it's just the place that holds the soul and the mind. So if the heart is beating and I can think, it's not the end of the life. It's just a life challenge. I am speaking, for look, this is our number one in the middle. I don't know if you can see this.
Hmm.
He's 20. When the war started, he turned 20 on February 9th, and then 2 weeks later the war came. He volunteered. He didn't need to go. They didn't draft him. He had 5 years that he could stay at home, but he volunteered and he started flying drones. And it wasn't enough for him because he wanted to be in front lines. He told me, I cannot hide behind backs of civilians. And I said, man, but you're fighting with the drone. He says, no, I really wanted to be in the front line. And he spent 5 months writing, applying that he wants to be transferred to an assault brigade. He said, I want to be in the assault brigade. I want to be I want to be the guy who is in front of the civilians, not behind them. And he got his wish granted, and then it was just he didn't last a really long time, and his commander went down, and he was actually the closest guy to his commander, and he said he was like 10 yards away from his commander when he got shot.
Wow.
So he said he almost made it to his commander to pull him out of the line of fire, and they got him. And he said it took him, he said it felt like an eternity to get away from there. And obviously then they go, through the darkness. And the ones that come out from the darkness, we just, we had one just left 2 days ago, and we have one that is still here. So our number one guy, the one in the middle, he's actually doing rehab here for 1 month to save his only leg. And he he's learning to swim. Last week he got on the bike. He's riding a bike on the road. He is doing Pilates and stretching. He is like trying all the things that he would never try. And now he's trying things that he thought he would never do. He got on the bike. He said, man, this is my first time on the bike. I said, what do you mean? He says, yeah, since I lost my leg, like I tried many times, and we tried to get him a stationary bike. He couldn't do it because, we push down, then it stops. But when he just took a bike from one of our volunteers, and the volunteer said, you have to wear a helmet. And he said, I knew I couldn't stop that guy. So I just gave him a helmet, and then he rolled off, and it just so happened that I came to the beach and I saw him, and I have the video of his first ride.
Wow.
So, they're willing to try whatever. When the society told them they could not do it just by being in a supportive environment, they start doing it. And oh, by the way, they can do everything that we can do.
Excuse me. What promise did you make, and why did you choose to keep it no matter what the cost was?
If you think about the importance of promises in our society, it's actually an instrumental building block to the efficiency and, let's say, profitability of how we function, how our economy functions. So let's say, for example, you have an employer who says, okay, if you're my employee, I need you to do this kind of work. And if you do that kind of work, I will pay you, we have 2 pay periods normally per month. So I will pay you this Friday, and then after one Friday, you will get a paycheck. So all the employees show up on the first day of the work month, and they work, they fulfill their obligations. And let's say we get to the point where the paycheck has to come, but the employer doesn't follow through. They break that promise. They say, I promise to pay you, but I cannot. I will pay you next time. Well, all the employees, they have obligations. They have family, they have a home, may have a car payment, whatever. And if they didn't get paid because their employer broke the promise, now they're breaking promises down the line. If the employer doesn't come through, then the employee will say, I'm not going to do my job. Sorry, I cannot work for you because you don't pay me. And if everybody starts breaking promises, now you start breaking promises within the family, with your friends, at work, everywhere, then our society will have to deal with so much extra work. Like, I may require my employer to pay me every hour because I don't trust him, right? Or, some people have to look through messages of their spouses and where you were, and that's what the broken promises do. People who always follow their promises, they don't have anything to worry about. They can just function freely. No, I think one of the biggest promises that we make as a society is to the people who defend our freedom. You and I, we are having this conversation because we are living in a peaceful environment. People who live in Ukraine or other places that are at active war, they cannot have this conversation because, they may have to run off to a bomb shelter at any moment of time. Plus, they're restricted on a lot of things that they're allowed, and when there's war, your freedom of speech is not exactly, it's not a priority. You don't have a freedom of speech. The government tells you what you can and cannot say. So we all know that the sun rises on the east, and if every morning you turn around towards the rising sun, that's where the war is. All the wars are east from us. We are Western societies. We live in relative peace, and all wars are being fought on the east. And just as sun travels from east to west, it's the same way the war wants to go west because the dudes who didn't develop anything, that didn't learn, that didn't work hard, they didn't do things the right way, they live in a mess. And the only way you can survive in a mess is by fighting and taking other people's stuff. So when they take away all their stuff and they really have nothing to take from each other, they go outside of the country. Now, in our case, there are men and women who are a lot braver than me. I never served in the military. Just I see that they say, okay, I'm going to go and defend my country. And when they go and defend their country, we as a society, we make them a promise saying, look, if anything happens to you, right, if you get hurt or if you lose part of your body, then we're going to take care of you. Period. There's no, the contract is really short. And God forbid something happens to you and you die, then we'll take care of your family. And if you really think about how things are working in our society, that's the contract that's being broken all the time. There are millions of movies that are made about these great veterans, right? Doing the great things and
Mm-hmm.
then getting hurt, losing legs, arms, whatever. And they're not the same. And then, they show that the movies have told us a story, and those movies have been made, for how long we're making 100 years of movies. You
Mm-hmm.
can go to the beginning, it's always there. So what I am trying to do is I'm trying to keep the promise that we all made, not just I. Yes, I made that promise because I'm part of the society and I'm a productive member of the society, and I want to work and I want to contribute. And for me to be able to chase my dreams and work as much as I want to, then I need somebody to fight for my freedom. I can do it or somebody else can do it for me. And in my case, I'm a civilian, so I know somebody is really physically fighting for my freedom and occupying that space. There's war, there's peace, and they're in between. So if we break that promise, then the future generations will say, oh, I know that story. This is what they did to my grandpa. This is what they did to my mom or dad, right? Who were veterans. And I'm not going to do it. So if less people want to do it, it always affects the strength of the military. Then we have totally different issues. And I don't want to deal with those issues because I live in a mess like that. It is practically impossible to solve it because, it's relatively easy to start a war. It's extremely difficult to finish it. It takes very little time to start it, but then it could take decades to finish it. And I think like the biggest thing is not the wars that a president or whoever is leading a country, their number one job is to not start wars. Do everything you can to not start it. But once it starts, then the system is overwhelmed. And I've heard it from more than two veterans, US veterans, who said, I survived the war, but I'm not sure if I can survive the red tape at the VA.
Hmm.
So what I'm doing is
Wow.
that I'm eliminating all the red tape. Anybody, it's random luck, you know, how we find somebody who would come to us, but they just, they appear. It was first one was referred. I went to the Ukrainian government, and because they knew where I worked, they knew who I was, so they trusted me with the first one. But the rest, it's already going, and it's like these people are showing up random, and it's in some universal energetic way we find each other. And once they get here, then I really, my goal is to give them what they need so they get that little bit of taste. Like, for example, I want them to go out of their country. This mission is an international mission. In November, I will take it to the United States. And the main reason I started it not in the United States, because it would cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney fees, in structuring, insurance, and writing all the policies and procedures. Where in a third world country, it was just a handshake. Can you do it? Yes. Can you do it? Yes. How are we going to do it? Like this. Okay, let's do it. It was just like that. And somebody trusted me with the hero. We flew the guy, and it was phenomenal. It was super successful. And from there on, I knew, once it's built, that people will come. I have volunteers that right now we have, like I mentioned, one guy is rehabbing here for a month. We are saving his only leg. And when I'm on podcasts, so I have to do work, I have volunteers that are spending time with him. He's never alone. If he wants to be alone, he has his own place. He's staying at an apartment that I rented for him. But if he wants to have socialize and be with people who will get him anything he wants, like these guys are awesome. Just whatever he wants, he just says a word, and they deliver it. They get it for him. And I could not create an environment like that in the United States, just because life in Turkey, where we are right now, it's just simpler. The people don't have such demand on their time, and therefore they're more generous. Like in the States, we're busy all the time. I don't have the time to give you. I could write you a check, but I could not give you half a day or 3 hours. Like, it's extremely hard to find. But here, I'm really lucky that we have the sea, we have the mountains, we have culture, food, volunteers. So imagine I take an amputee and I tell them, look, you guys got to get here first. They have to cross outside of the Ukraine because the air is closed. You cannot fly. So they go into the European Union. In our case, they ride to Budapest, Hungary, and from there they take a plane and they fly to the southern part of Turkey, because we're on the Mediterranean Sea. We're not where Istanbul is. We're on Antalya, which is western, southwest part of Turkey. And then they pick them up with the car, 2 hour drive, and we are at their location. It's ideal. So the promise that I'm trying to keep is, the one that the society made, and the society is busy with other things, and it's out of sight, out of mind. But these people sacrificed a lot, and I think they deserve to be pampered just for a little bit of time. They have finished.
So, how can everyday people take part in keeping the promise that we all made?
I think I learned this from the Red Cross. Just really briefly, for me, the Red Cross, I worked in the World Trade Center, and after September 11th, I had to move to different places within the States, trying to find a place to live and work. And because my principal place of employment or work was destroyed, I classified as a displaced person, and the Red Cross sent me a check for $15,000. We're talking about back in
Wow.
2001, 2002. Yeah, they didn't ask for anything. This year, I went around the world to see how different cultures keep promises to people who, serve. And basically, one of the places I went to the Red Cross Museum in Geneva, and I found out that back in 1859 there was one guy. It was a Swiss banker. His name is Henry Dunant, who was traveling on business to Italy, and he came to a place called Solferino, where they fought a battle. It was the Imperial Army. It was France and Italy. They had about 150,000 soldiers. And on the other side was Austro-Hungarian Empire. They had 170,000. So we had more than 300,000 people fighting. And when they were done, they just left. And he said there was a field of 40,000 plus dead and wounded, and nobody was helping. So he went, organized all the villagers from around, from the villages, and at that time mostly were women because men were fighting, and they pulled everyone out for days, if not, it was close to a week. And he finishes with this. He goes back to Geneva and he writes a book that is called A Memory of Solferino. And that book was so widely received that he was able to start the Red Cross. And 11 months later, after the Red Cross was started, they signed the first Geneva Convention. And the Geneva Conventions are important because they stipulate how we treat prisoners of war. And later Geneva Conventions, they said how you treat innocent bystanders, because when war comes, it doesn't really discriminate. Everyone is affected. So it was just seeing that one man could do so much. Today there's more than 11 million volunteers working for the Red Cross, and that was a huge inspiration. Just seeing one guy not being able to look away, and we have the Red Cross, and I think I really connected with the fact how the Red Cross helped me, seeing what they've done. With collecting names of people who died, families can have closure. I think it's the biggest thing. In Geneva, they have more than 6 million little cards with names. That means that tens of millions of people could say, okay, he's gone or she's gone, goodbye. And they could have closure and move on. So, you just find yourself in a situation where you are doing work that is bigger than me or all the people that I meet. And, I inspire to be neutral and I inspire to be open to everyone, for it doesn't matter where they serve, they're all welcome. And I hope one day I get big enough that I can, not take one, two, three, but 1,000, 10,000. There's so many of them. It's endless. So I don't have enough lifetime to take care of them all, but I hope I can start set up an organization that will be doing that long after I'm gone.
All right. So, as a final question today, what piece of advice would you like to leave with the listeners?
Um, Piece of advice for what?
For
If you
for
could be a
for
little more
for
specific.
anything,
Okay,
anything
okay.
that's on your mind.
I think Okay, so what comes to mind is that I would say, what I think a lot about, like threats. I don't know why, maybe it's a lifetime story, but I think the biggest threat that is facing the Western society is apathy. If you can see somebody who is weaker than you, an old lady, dropping a bag at the crosswalk, or, somebody struggling, in our case, it could be a veteran without a leg. And if you can just turn away and look away, that apathy is the biggest threat, because um, we lose the humanity, and we've been so conditioned. Like the more we get away from hi, nice to meet you, personal meetings, to being behind the screen, it becomes easier and easier and easier to look away. But I'd say, what I learned from the Red Cross is there are three ways that you can help. There's only three ways. Number one, you can donate blood, because there's always huge shortage. And when you donate blood, you really save lives. Like, you donate it now, a few hours later, somebody get a second chance. Number two, you can provide service. And by volunteering and giving your time is the biggest thing that you can do. Because the time that you give to somebody, you will never get it back. And if you give it to somebody who is less fortunate, then the miracles happen. You see how good you have it. So, providing service is the biggest thing that you can do. And obviously, the third way is making donations. So, if somebody wants to be helpful right now, you say, well, donate blood, you volunteer for whatever is important to you, or you donate money and support the charities that are doing the work that you cannot, because, we don't have opportunities and time to start something like Wings for Heroes. I was just lucky in the right place, and I'd done a lot enough in my life that you could just move on, and now it's flying. So
that's a good way to wind up this episode, Lyubim. So our guest today has been Lyubim Kogan, the founder of Wings for Heroes. Thank you so much, Lyubim, for joining us today from Turkey.
thank you for having me, Melvin. Thank you very much.
Please go to my
Nice to meet you.
website at podcastreallife.com for more information about my guest and the things we discussed today, including how you can contribute to the success of Wings for Heroes. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.